Okay, so flows can work with both Lightning and Classic. There are certain components that require Lightning runtime. So basically, Lightning runtime is just a setting in your automation settings that says enable this, and then you can still use it with Classic. Um, there's a lot of different types of flows. You can have screen flows where you can interact with your users, auto-launched flows that are called from somewhere else, like you used to call them from Process Builder, or you can even call them from Apex, something like that. We now have record triggered and scheduled triggered flows. So either they're triggered by a record changing somehow or being created, or on a schedule, like a time schedule. So every day, every week, that kind of a thing. As well as some others like platform events driven flows. So the cool thing about Flow is it's like Process Builder's older, cooler cousin. Um, it can actually retrieve information from your database and display it. It can also create and update records, which Process Builder was able to do. And it can delete records. So lots of things that you can do with Flow that you were not able to do just with Process Builder before. It can also do a lot of other things like send emails or send custom notifications. You can also access all of your quick actions or your local actions that you have. So if you have email alerts and email templates set up like that, you don't have to rebuild all of them in Flow. Flow actually has access to that stuff in your org, which is pretty cool. And you also have the ability to access other flows. So you can start to break up your automations into like Lego bricks and say, okay, there's this thing that I want to do multiple different times, maybe with a few different tweaks. So you can actually make it its own flow and call it from somewhere else. And we call this a subflow. If you're familiar with like invocable processes in Process Builder, it's kind of the same thing. It has to be called by another process. In this case, this is a flow that has to be called by another flow. So fun fact, underneath the hood, processes are actually flows. And if you've ever used the where is this used button in setup on a field that is actually part of a process, if you click on it, it'll actually open your process in Flow Builder, and it's kind of a crazy thing to look at. But that also explains why when your processes run into issues, assuming that happens to you, I know it happens to me, you actually get a flow error email. So as you're going into building your flows, I definitely think naming conventions is something that you should think about. There was kind of an ultimate guide to Salesforce flow and process automation that got posted on the admin blog. I think it's one of my resources. They have some very stringent naming convention rules that I don't necessarily subscribe to personally. Another friend of mine actually presented on Automation Hour earlier this year, and she has a very complex naming convention that works for her, and she shared that out in that presentation with everyone. But essentially, what you want to do is you want to have a way to name your resources so that they are obvious what they are, they're easy for someone else to read and follow, and to be able to understand what is going on in your flow if they're not the one who built it. So in code, especially in Apex code, there's something called camel case. And so camel case is where the first letter is lowercase, then the first letter of every new word after that gets capitalized. So if you think like hashtags that are all in lowercase are hard to read because where do the words fit? If you capitalize that first one, it's way easier to read. So personally, the way I do it is I include an abbreviation for each type of resource that I have. So, and a lot of the reason I do this is because let's say I have a variable, and a variable we'll talk about in a little bit. But basically, it's a container to put something in that I'm going to change later. Think of it like a grocery bag. You know, you go to the store, this time I put milk and flour in it. Next time I go, I put eggs and lettuce in it. So it's a bag, it holds stuff. It just, what's in it can change. So I usually prefix those with a VAR. But often I want to make what goes in that bag, like a name, very specific and follow a specific format. So usually I will have some sort of a formula to set that name. So maybe it'll be like opportunity space dash space account name. And that's kind of the format that I want. And so most of the time my users will only throw in something for an opportunity name. So what I'll do is I'll take whatever they put in and go, yeah, but add the account name to the back of it. And so a lot of times when I do that, I now need a formula that also makes sense to name account name because that's what my formula is doing. It's creating that account name. So if I have one prefix with FML, because I mean, if you've used formulas, you know that's generally what you say anyway. But you can have one be the VAR for the variable, one be the FML for the formula. And so that way you can sort of understand that I'm using this formula to populate the value of this variable type thing. When you go through choices, I usually throw a C in front of them. If I have multiple questions on a screen, I will also put something about that question or that group of choices, like product, so that they also show up together in my resource list. If it's a collection variable, meaning that I'm going to put more than one thing in my bag. So a variable, the bag could be just eggs or just milk or just flour. In a collection variable, I could put all 4 of them in the same bag. So I actually notate that with a CVAR, so I know that I'm expecting there to possibly be more than one record in that variable collection. A pick list choice set. So this is where you can take a pick list that already exists in your org and turn it into a set of choices for the user on screen. So that's a PCS for pick list choice set. And then I throw in the object and the field that I'm using to make that pick list choice set. So it's very easy for me to go look in my org and figure out where it's coming from. Okay, any questions so far? All right. So elements and resources. Elements are actions that your flow can take, more or less, and resources are containers that you're going to use to hold data in your flow. So if we look at the toolbar, there are different types of elements available based on the type that you select. So for example, I'm using a screen flow, so I have the ability to put a screen in there. This is something that will actually display to your user that we expect your user to either read text that you have put on there, fill out some fields, input fields like text, number, date, pretty much anything that you can put on a record page. And then there's a few of those other special components, like you have email or URL that are specifically set up to make sure that you follow proper syntax. Actions. This is how you access all of those quick or standard actions that are in your org. So if you want to log a call or send an email, or if you have some custom quick actions that you've built on an object, you can access all of them from there. Again, subflow, like we talked about, you can call another flow from within your flow. You can call an auto-launched flow from a screen flow or from another auto-launched flow. You might also be able to call them now from after save record triggered flows. You can also, from a screen flow, call another screen flow. But what you can't do is launch a flow that does not have user interaction, so record triggered, time triggered, anything like that, and then call the screen flow that you expect some interaction from the user. It's kind of going backwards down a one-way street. You're not allowed to do that. So after that, this is where we manipulate data in our flow with these logic elements. And so we have an assignment. So basically an assignment is the action of putting something into our variable, into our bag. So you set the value of a resource. You can either set like a record field value to the value of a field on a screen. So like if someone is going through a wizard to create a new account or contact, whatever they put in for the account name, you're going to assign that to a variable. And that's how you're going to create that new record. Or you could do something like, get me all of the accounts in Canada. And you can actually set a record count for that collection. So if it finds 10,000 accounts, it's going to set a variable to say accounts in Canada is 10,000. Decisions, you can actually have your flow do different things based on certain criteria. So maybe you want to know of all of those accounts, are they business or residential? So we're going to go through and we're going to go, is this a business account? Okay, then I need to do something. Or if it's a residential account, I need to do something else. This is also really good for doing a null or an empty check on records before you proceed. So anytime you go and get information out of your database, so go get me all the accounts in Canada, the first thing that you should ask your flow is, did you find anything? Flow is much like a toddler. If you don't explicitly tell it what you want and follow up with it, it basically gets bored and it goes off to watch TV. So if you tell it to go get all of the accounts in Canada and it says, oh, well, I didn't find any, it just goes off and watches TV. It doesn't tell you it didn't find any. It just literally stops in its tracks. And so we want to make sure that we go, okay, now, if you didn't find any, here's what I want you to do. If you did find any, then, we want you to do something else. A loop we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but essentially this is how you go through a collection variable, multiple records. So if I were looking for a single account in Canada, I wouldn't need to use a loop. But if I was getting multiple accounts in Canada, let's say I want all of the accounts in Ottawa, then I would have to loop through them one by one to be able to do anything with all of those accounts. So one of the things that I always tell people is never put pink in a loop. And so the pink are these data elements down here. I think some people call them red. They look pink to me. So, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to put those inside of a loop. Basically, it has to do with limits, and we'll get to some of that in a little bit. But just for now, remember that yellow in a loop is okay. Pink in a loop, don't do it unless you absolutely have to. There's always ways, exceptions to rules and reasons to do it. But like Uncle Ben and Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility. So generally, I just say don't do it. And then you realize that when you do it, you've done it because there's no way around it.
Michelle?
Yeah.
So get reads, even that?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
So you'll have to show us afterwards how you do it then.
Every pink is a call to the database, and you have a set number of calls to the database that you're allowed to make in one flow. So if you were to put it in your loop, and again, like I said, there's always exceptions. But generally, you want to get all of your records, collect them, and then basically go through them one by one after you've gotten them all, and then loop through what you went and got. You don't want to go through and get a record and then go get another record on top of it. There's a few things that make that difficult, for sure, and we can absolutely talk about it. But again, if I tell you never to put pink in a loop, then if you actually do decide to do it, at least you basically have remembered that we said not to do it, and you have a very good reason and can justify why you are, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So,
yes, thank you. Actually, cool. I thought about it more and I realized that you could just do a variable read of all your records and then have everything in memory and then do the loop.
Possibly, definitely. So the cool thing about the logic, like the assignments, is it's sort of like a sandbox inside of your org, or a sandbox inside of your sandbox. If I put 15 assignment elements on my flow canvas and I change the name of account 15 times, it doesn't hurt anything. Nothing has actually happened. Nothing is saved back to the database until there's pink on your canvas. Unless we're talking about a before save record triggered flow, or a record triggered flow that is optimized for field updates. But even that, they're moving to using update records for consistency. So really, when you put pink on the canvas is when it gets real. This is when you're putting stuff back in the database, or you're getting stuff out of the database, or more importantly, you're deleting stuff from your database. And let me tell you, it's real. There is something in Flow called rollback mode. There are a couple of flow types that don't have rollback mode enabled, which means when you run that flow, even in debug, guess what? It's really happening. And if we have enough time, I'm going to go through an example and show you how it's real. And then even in debugging, I'm going to create a brand new account. So a create is going to create one or more records. An update is going to update one or more records that already exist in the database. You cannot do these two things together in Flow. I know you can encode, so if you're used to that encode, does not work here. Creates, updates, separate. Get is going to retrieve one or more records from your database. It's basically like going to a filing cabinet and thumbing through all the files and finding the ones that you need. And then delete, obviously, we're deleting stuff from your database. It's going to go into that recycle bin for your 14, 15 days, whatever. But I'm not kidding you, it does delete it. So if you decide to delete an account, you're going to cascade delete every account, every contact, every opportunity, every insert rest of your objects here. So again, always build your flows in a sandbox. Always test your flows extensively in a sandbox. Make sure you know what they're doing. Remember Uncle Ben. Okay, so the resources then that we can use within these elements are kind of interesting and a little bit different. So a variable. This is a container that's going to hold information that can potentially change. So it's like a bag that can stretch. You can put something square in this bag. You can put something round in this bag. You can make it a collection variable, and you can put multiple things in this bag of the same shape. The one thing you can't do is mix and match shapes in a bag, in a variable. But essentially, it's going to hold something that can vary by definition. That's why it's a variable. So a constant then is a container that holds information that does not change. It remains constant the whole time. So if you had a custom metal box in the shape of a star made, the only thing that you could really put in that is what was designed to go in it. It would not make sense for you to put something smaller in it, so let's not go there. But you're also going to padlock it. So whatever is in there, and it's going to stay. It's not going to change. We're not going to mess with it. It's there. So that is a constant. A formula, this is just like any other formula that you use in a validation rule or a formula field. It can be doing calculations like math. It can be text, logic, all that kind of great stuff. But you can manipulate your information with formulas. So a text template is going to store text that you want to manipulate within your flow that has generally some sort of styling to it. So maybe you need paragraphs or line breaks. Maybe you want mail merges in it so that if you're working with contact A, you can say dear contact A first name. And if you're working with contact B, then it can be dear contact B first name. And that can change because it's got a placeholder or a merge field that can be updated as you go through with different records. A choice, this is an option that you have defined for a user to pick on a screen. It's kind of like setting up a pick list field with pick list values if you want to associate it to something in the UI. A record choice set then is kind of the same thing, but instead of defining like actual text values that you want them to pick from like you do in a pick list field, you give them a choice of records. So maybe you want all business records from Ottawa. And so then you're going to give them that defined list. And that's probably a terrible example because there could be still be hundreds or thousands of those that you wouldn't want them to pick from. But if you had a smaller example for a use case, then a record choice set would be really good because they can actually specifically say, I'm looking for this record out of this list of records. Pick list choice set then is just instead of having to reinvent your pick list, take the one that already exists, use it in your flow. The stage then actually sets the stages within your flow like a path or a progress indicator. So if you're on Lightning, you're familiar with path, especially if you're going to expose a flow like this somewhere, maybe on a community or on a public web page. If it's a multi-screen flow, sometimes it's helpful for you to be able to say, okay, you're on screen 1 of 4, you're on screen 3 or 4, and give them kind of that progress indicator so they know how close to done they are. That's what you can kind of do with this stage thing. Honestly, I have never gotten to use it. There are a few new things that are out since I put this presentation together. I know record collection sort is one of them. Honestly, they are new enough. I have not used them. So again, not the end all be all expert, and we'll give you some additional resources at the end. But this will give you a good starting kind of point for learning flow. Okay, so there are 2 reserved variables in Salesforce. And so they have been designated for a special purpose. And if you try and do something else with them, you're not going to get very far. So don't try it. The cool thing is what they do is pretty awesome. But generally I say use these for what they're for and don't try and do anything else with them. Also, just completely avoid anything that looks like this, but isn't this. So the first one is record ID. Now, we mentioned camel case before. Syntax matters with this. It's in camel case, meaning the R has to be lowercase, the I has to be uppercase, and the D has to be lowercase. Anything else is not this reserved variable, and it does not work the same way. Also gets very confusing for someone else who knows about this reserved variable to come in and see something that's similar but not quite right because it doesn't actually do what they expect maybe, or they realize that you're using it for another purpose, but it's just, it gets hairy, don't do it. So basically what this does is it gives your flow interview, which is you running this flow one time, context. So if I want to run a screen flow on an account, then I need it to know which account am I on? Am I on the Salesforce account? Am I on the Acme account? Am I on the Dunder Mifflin account? So by using this record ID, I can pass it in and basically say, whatever account I'm on, take that record ID, pass it into my flow. And so then if I ask my flow to say, hey, flow, can you tell me what the address for this account is? You can be like, oh yeah, sure, I can do that because I know what account you're on. And so basically that's what we're trying to do with that. This is where you're going to use a variable with an available for input checkmark. That got me a lot when I first started with Flow. I used to check both of them, available for input and output, all the time. Not necessarily needed until you actually need to pass something from outside of your flow into your flow, like this record ID. So the other one, $record. So this is basically a global variable. You'll see the global variables have a $sign in front of them. So like they have global constant true and false that you can set, which is just either true or false, yes, no, like checkboxes type thing. But basically this is because when you schedule a flow to run, or if you run it based on a record changing, how do you know which record that is? We don't have the record ID to be able to pass because that changes based on what is actually happening at runtime. So what we do is we have this $record placeholder variable, and it knows what kind of record, what object you're using, so that it understands the structure of your object, all of the custom fields, all of those validation rules and things that are on there, and it can use it. And you can use it even though you don't necessarily know exactly which record in that object you're going to be using at the time you run this. So the cool thing is, we'll talk about bulkification in a second, because basically it's all about sharing resources on the platform. But there's always an exception to every rule. So if you run a scheduled flow, meaning you're scheduling it to run at a specific time, like daily or weekly or something like that, it is going to go find however many records meet the criteria that you set in the entry criteria, and it will run a separate flow interview for every record that meets that criteria. So basically, you don't have to worry about bulkifying your flow itself, because Salesforce takes care of that for you on the back end. But only if you have some sort of criteria in your entry that says only run on these records. If you don't put any start criteria in there, then you still need to bulkify it, because you're going to have to go get basically every single record that you want out of this particular object, because you have not given Flow enough information to do that for you. So this will make much more sense when we get into doing some of this. So I think we're still doing okay on time. So we'll get through a couple more and then we'll do some examples. Okay, so straightening out the loops. Loops are something that gives everybody heartburn because they just don't really understand what we're doing here. So we're going to take a step out of Salesforce and we are going to go back to the 1970s, and we are going to be in an office where there is a filing cabinet, a desk, and a bunch of paper forms. Okay, everybody time traveling with me here? So basically what we're doing, if you put pink in a loop, you're going to make your employees quit. So back in the 70s, what we would be doing here is, let's say we would need to go to our filing cabinet, which is our Salesforce database, and we would need to find all of the records. And let's say in this case, we're going to go get all the records in California. And so we go and we find all the records in California. And for today, we're going to say there's 50 records. So we're going to grab all 50 of those records. We now have a giant stack of folders in our arms. We're going to walk over to our desk and we're going to put it down here. Now, the reason we got all the records from California is because with California's new privacy laws, we need to basically mark on all of those accounts that they are subject to more stringent privacy policies. So we need to make sure that that is marked on there so that when someone's talking to someone from that company, they understand they're from California and these extra rules apply. So let me ask you this. It's audience participation time. If I flip open the first folder on my stack and I check the box that says they're subject to CCPA, does that magically bleed down to the other 49 records in my stack?
No, it will not.
Nope, it does not. This is why we need a loop. So what we do is we place the stack of records. Let's say it's on the left side of our desk because I'm right-handed. So then what I do is I grab that first folder off, I move it in front of me on the desk so I can work on it. I flip it open, I check the box, and so now I'm going to walk it back to the filing cabinet. Then I'm going to come back to my desk. I'm going to grab the second one off the stack. I'm going to check that box. I'm going to get my little butt up out of my chair, and I'm going to walk that one over to the filing cabinet. Who's tired already? And we've only done 2.
It's a good Weight Watcher program, though.
It's a phenomenal Weight Watcher program. The problem is that Salesforce, being a multi-tenant platform, means that we all have one pie and we have to share that pie between all of us. And I don't know about you, but I get a little crabby when people start trying to eat my pie and I stab them with forks. So What we are trying to do with this is we are trying to be good stewards of our pie and only eat our piece, so that way Kevin doesn't have to go without any pie. So if that is what you do in a bad loop, this is putting pink in a loop. So essentially this walk back to the filing cabinet is when you do like a create or an update record within your loop. Essentially you're walking one at a time back to your filing cabinet. So instead we bulkify this for efficiency and to make sure that we're only eating our own slice of pie. So this time we went to the filing cabinet, we got all 50 of our records for California. I put one in front of me on my desk, I check that box, and then I move it to a stack on the right side of my desk. So think about this as an inbox and an outbox. And so again, essentially everything in Flow needs to be in a container of some sort. So I have a get records that created me a record collection. Then I go through and I do a loop that uses a single record variable to be this one in front of me here. Then I use an assignment action to actually update the value of this form. So checking the box is my first assignment in that variable. Then I have another assignment that adds this form here to this stack, which is another collection variable over on my right. So after I go through this 50 times and I've checked all of those and I'm totally ready for lunch, I take my stack of 50 records and I walk back to the filing cabinet once and I file all 50 of them at one time. That counts as one call to the database. You are limited to, I believe, 100 DML statements. So now if I wanted to do this the bad way, with 50, I'd be okay. Wouldn't be too bad. But let's just say that we then get business for every single In-N-Out burger in California. I'm guessing there's probably hundreds in a state that size. So now if I need to create all of those and I have more than 100, I can't do that one at a time. I'll run into limits. And these limits are not ones that you can recover from. Flow does not give you a graceful out. It does not give you any way to go back and go, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do it that way. It just goes, you're trying to eat somebody else's pie. And not only do you not get to eat any more pie, but I'm taking your pie away. You don't get to eat any of it now. Just stop. So we definitely want to try and avoid that at all costs. So, but essentially that's what we're doing with a loop is we get a bunch of records from our filing cabinet, we bring them back to our desk. One by one, we go through them and figure out what we need to do with them. So maybe there are certain ones that, well, if it's a business, we need to check that CCPA box. If it's a residential, we don't, for example. So I could make that decision and then I would have two piles, one of things I need to take back that have been updated and then one of other records that just need to go back. In the real world, the analogy breaks a little bit because you need to get them all back to the filing cabinet. So in a Flow world, you only need to resave to the filing cabinet or to the database, the ones that have actually changed. But work with me here a little bit. So you would still collect all the ones that had changes, take them back to the filing cabinet. Okay, so there are a ton of learning resources out there. So I will make this presentation available. There are a lot of great things out there. Unofficial SF has a lot of, here's how you work with Flow, here's what Flow does, here's how you learn Flow. They also have a ton of components and local actions to be able to extend your Flow and do more things with it. So basically there's other cool people who have written something that uses code or Apex to be able to do something. And then they've basically turned it into something that you can plug into your Flow and be like, well, I can just tell you the things that you need and then you can go do it for me. And then I don't have to know how to write the code. I can just use the code you already wrote. So we're going to go through a few scenarios and a couple of them are actually part of Terry's Tidbits series. I actually guessed instructed for a couple of those episodes. So I definitely encourage you to try out that if you're learning Flow as well. So again, I always invite everybody to contact me, get in touch if you've got questions, if you want me to hold your hand through your first, Flow building adventure. I would love nothing more than to do that. It always makes me super excited when somebody who's previously been, kind of intimidated by Flow or said they hated Flow, they're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome and I love it. And thank you so much for, making it less scary. And trust me, at some point during that, you'll get bitten by the Flow bug and then you'll just want to automate everything. So I'll throw this slide up again in a little bit, but for now, I'm actually going to hop over to my dev org and we are going to do some examples. So let's see here. How do I get rid of this little button? That's how I do it. Okay. So we are going to go to setup and we are going to go under process automation and find flows. Honestly, I'm usually pretty lazy, so typing flow in here gets me what I want. And so then we are going to do a new flow. Our first scenario is going to be a screen flow. So we have a problem with user adoption. They say it's too many steps to create an account and then a contact. So we are going to make that go a whole lot faster. We're going to create a screen flow that allows us to do both on the same screen. So because we need interaction from our user, we are going to go with a screen flow here. So I'm an old school flow builder, so I absolutely always go freeform. If auto layout makes more sense to you, rock on with it. But for today, I'm going to demo this in freeform. So, okay, we have a start. So then we need to do the first thing in our flow. And the first thing I want to do in my flow is I want to collect information from my user. So I'm going to drag this screen over here and put it on there. I need to give my screen a name. So I'm going to call this input screen. And it gives me an API name. And so this is a screen. So SCN is going to be how I label that. So I know that it's a screen. I could also do like an input screen like that. So I know that I'm expecting user input in that screen. For expediency today, I'm going to skip descriptions, but I generally tell people there's two types of admins, those that fill out descriptions and those that everybody else hates, including yourself. Fill out your descriptions. You will thank me later. Probably you will thank yourself later. Okay, so now I need some basic information about this account. So the first thing I need is an account name, so I can scroll through over here until I find a text, drag that onto the canvas. I also, for expediency today, there is an address, but I'm just going to use a series of text fields to do this so I can search for that text component and drag that over here. So I can drag multiple on the page until I have enough to do everything I want. Let's see, street, city, state, and zip. Okay. So now that I have all of these placeholder text fields, I can go in and I can configure each one. So we're going to do an account name. This has to be required. You can't create a record without an account name. So I'm going to make sure the user has to enter it. Now you've got a little red asterisk. Okay, so now I want a street address. And I need a city. I need a state. And I need a zip or a postal code, depending on what country you're in. So, and I could make any of those required if I want. For now, I'm just going to skip them. But then the last thing I want is a website. And so there is actually a special component type called URL. So I'm going to drag this over. It's going to look different than just a standard text field because now the label says URL. I actually want that to say website because that's probably nicer. So I'm also going to use website back as the API name. So now I have all of these other things for me to throw in here that are kind of weird. So disabled, I'm going to make that global constant false because I absolutely don't want this to be disabled. I want them to be able to fill it out. I also don't want this to be read only. I do want this to be required. So I'm actually going to change that to global constant true. So if I start typing ahead, I get my true. So this is going to be my second required field. So I can put a placeholder value in here. So http:// for example, assuming I can type, which is never a good thing on a WebEx. So that's going to show up as the value if they don't put anything else in here. You can do that. There's some options on pattern. So you can use a regex formula to do this. I honestly hate regex, so we're not going to do this today, but you have some options there as well. So, but for now, we're doing pretty good. I'm going to leave this here. So now that I've gotten everything I need for an account, I need a contact. So for a contact, I need their name. So I need some more text fields because I'm going to need a first name. I'm going to need a last name. I've got a pretty cool one for email here to make sure they actually put an email in like the way it should actually be. So I think that's going to be good enough really for me to start this. I just need their first name or their name and their email. So again, we're going to do first name and I'm going to require this. Last name, absolutely also required. It's hard to have a contact if you don't know what their name is. And then email, I also want to require. So I'm going to call this email, not disabled. I can do placeholder text. So it shows the you@example.com. So required, I'm going to make this true. and we're going to be good here. So I'm going to hit done.
Can you go back? Just let me ask one question.
Sure.
So when you go back to the URL, I just want to really look at that URL or the website, sorry. So read only, explain that read only and required again.
So required means the user is required to fill it out before they can leave the screen.
Okay.
Read only would be just like if you made a field read only on your page layout.
Okay.
It's going to display, but they're not going to be able to edit it. In this case, because I'm specifically asking them to fill it out, I don't want that to be read only, so it's got to be false.
Okay, I got it. Sorry.
No, not a problem.
I was nodding off for a few seconds and I missed that part.
Wow, I'm that boring. Okay.
No, you're not. No, you were actually doing great. And I'll shut up here.
Oh, I'm just giving you a hard time. It's all good. Okay, so now what I have to do is my start needs to know where to go. So I connect that to my screen, and now I'm going to save my flow. So this is going to be my account and contact create wizard. So generally I name them differently so I know if they're screen flows or not, but for today and expediency, we're just going to do this. So now I can actually debug this, and debug this is going to show me what it looks like to my user without having to activate it like you do with Process Builder and then go change a record to see what actually happens and if it should. So I can go through this and see how it looks and how it works right now. So I'm going to run the latest version. I want it to show me all the details. I'm not putting any variables in to start because this is going to be the very first thing a user does for me. So I'm just going to hit run. And so here we can see that this is my account and contact create wizard. It asks me for an account name, street address, city, state, zip and postal code, website, first name, last name, and email. I don't really like this now that I look at it because there's a couple things missing here that just kind of look confusing. So I'm going to go back to Flow Builder. And I'm going to add a few more things. What I want is to actually break this up into sections. So I'm going to use a display text that's super down here at the bottom. And I'm going to put one up here on top. And so DT account info. And so now I have basically a rich text editor that I can display text to my user. And I'm going to kick this up to about 20-point font. And for funsies, let's make this a nice blue color. Okay, and while we're at it, let's center it. So now I have my account information section. I'm going to drag another one down here in between the website and the first name. And so this is my display text for contact info. And I'm going to do the same thing. We'll kick it up to about 20, bold, underline, do that. Let's make this one a nice green color, about there. Looks pretty good. Okay, you're hiding behind this obnoxious little window for Zoom. Okay. So now I've done that. I'm going to save it and I'm going to debug it again. So this time when I look at my screen, this looks a whole lot better. I can see where my account information is. I can see where my contact information is. All right, we're doing good. Looks cleaner. User interface is better. All right, so there's nothing that's going to happen after that. So there's no sense filling it out because now what we're going to do is we're going to start creating the records. So the first things first is I'm going to drag a create element over here. And we're going to call this create account. So I'm going to create one record. And I'm going to choose to use separate resources and literal values because things that got typed into that screen is what I actually want to use to have that created. So I want to create a record of the account type object. So now I'm going to say create my account and what values do I need? Well, I have a name. And then let's just set this to the billing address. So we're going to do billing street. And we'll do billing city, state. I love type ahead, so I don't have to scroll through all of these fields to find what I want. So, all right, my billing postal code. And then I had the website. Okay, so now that these are all of the fields on the account that I want to set, I need to tell them what they should be set to. So the name field, I'm going to go down here and I have a screen component section where the account name text field, whatever gets put in that field is where I want you to put into that name. So same thing here, I can go with street and city and state and zip code or postal code. Now for the website, this is going to look a little bit different because we have that website, but now this functions a whole lot more like a record, and it uses what we call dot notation. So I have this screen component that's kind of like an object, so account, but now I have all of these different fields that are part of those attributes. And so the one down at the bottom was called value. So website.value is going to be whatever they actually put in here gets saved into that component, into that container. So that's what I'm going to put for the website here. So I'm going to connect these two things here. So now that I've created my account, I'm going to create my contact. Can anybody tell me why I'm doing it in this order?
Because you don't want to have a often account contact.
Exactly, because orphan contacts cannot be seen by anyone other than the record owner. Not even a sysadmin can see an orphaned contact. That's just not good. So same thing, I'm going to create one record. I'm going to use what was given to me on that screen to do it. So now I'm going to find my contact object. And the fields that I need on here are their first name, their last name, their email address, and I'm missing a field. Can anyone tell me what I'm missing? Their account ID, so that we don't make them an orphaned contact. Now, the account that we're adding them to doesn't exist until we build this flow. So this is where flow gets really cool and kind of smart. So my first name, that's pretty easy. I'm going to use the first name field from the screen. Last name field, same thing. It's just a text box, so whatever they put in here. The email, again, it's a little bit different. So we go to that email, we find that value attribute, and that's what we're going to set this to. So now for account ID, I don't know what that account ID is until Flow creates it in the create record just before I got here. So I don't really have a good way of knowing what that is. But Salesforce is pretty smart and it goes, hey, you created something. I'll bet you're going to need that somewhere else in this flow. Otherwise, you wouldn't have created it yet. So here, it's going to give me just the ID from that create account. And so it's going to give me the account ID. So I can actually throw that value in here, and Salesforce is smart enough to know I already created it. So now that it's created, you have access to it to use it somewhere else. So we're going to do that with our contact. And now the one thing I like to do in the end is I like to make sure that if something happens in the database, we tell everybody. So I'm going to have a success screen. And again, I just want my display text. I'm going to drag this on here and it's going to go, congratulations, your account and contact have been created. You may now close this window. So again, I can change this a little bit. We'll just make it a little bit bigger, and green means good. So we'll do a nice green color again. Let's make it just a smidge bigger there. Okay, and let's center it. Okay, and I forgot to name it. Yep. So display text, my success message. Got to name everything. All right, so we'll connect that up. Normally I'm a stickler for straight lines, but for time, I'm going to try not to be. Okay, so we're going to do this, and now I'm going to debug this. So before I debug this, let's go look at all of my accounts. And so this is a Trailhead sandbox. I don't have a whole lot of accounts. I have 13. So you will notice that there is not an account in here called Acme. We are going to build it. So let's see if I can move you one more time. Come over here to Flow Builder. Let's debug this. Okay, so I'm running this in debug mode. So it has not been activated. I have not put this on a button anywhere, but I am going to create an Acme Inc. account. So got to put my www in there. That's helpful. And then we're going to make a contact for the Roadrunner. Okay, so I've got all of that information filled out. When I click next, it's going to run through, and now I've gotten to this screen here. So what's cool about this is we actually have all these debug details down here. So how it started is I started this and it says, okay, first thing up is a screen. Here's what the screen looks like. Here is what the user put in for every single one of those. I have a text box, I have a label, and this is what they got put in. So this is where I can see my value for that lightning component. For example, the website one. Same thing for everything in my contact information. So the next thing that we did is we went to that create records. And so it created the account where the billing city got set, postal code, state, street, zip, name, and website. And then it's ready to actually create that when we're done committing this whole transaction. Then we created the contact, same information that I put in here. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit finish here. I'm going to go back to my accounts and I'm going to refresh it. And now all of a sudden you can see that I have an Acme Inc. account and I have a Roadrunner contact. Both of those got created in my org, even though I just did this in debug, because you notice I did not have a debug rollback mode. Okay, makes sense? Any questions? How am I doing on time? Do I have time for one more example?
I have questions. What if something doesn't get saved? What do you do with fault?
Okay, so that's a little beyond what I wanted to talk through today, but quickly what we can do is, let's say something failed to create. I could throw another screen on here. So I'm just going to call this a fault screen. So I could throw some display text in here that basically says, oops. So then what I could do is I could actually move this down here as a fault path. So it's a red dotted line that says fault. So if for some reason it did not get created appropriately, I could then have the fault path, instead of going nowhere, go to the screen for basically displaying some sort of friendly or error message. Something did not work quite right. If you can capture what that fault actually is, then you could loop them back to the screen to have them fix it, or at least give them some sort of nice error message that says something went wrong. I need you to contact your admin for help. So you can connect multiple things to the same screen for a fault if you have the same message, or you could have different screens for everything. But essentially, every time there's a circle here, there's another path that you can connect. So if I remove this, you can see the create records has kind of a happy path, and then I can also add my fault path here. So that would be a way to do that. So, because yes, flow does not fail gracefully. That is one of its downfalls. You have to plan for that, as well as you have to plan for the happy path. So.
Another question on the screen. Is it possible to format the input sections?
Format how?
Like bold them. So you have like, enter account name. Can I bold that? If you just click on there, yes, please.
I don't think you can.
So the label, basically, can you format the labels?
I don't think so. If you were going to be able to, you'd have to use some sort of like HTML tags.
Yeah, I tried that.
Yeah, I don't think that works. If I remember correctly, I have not figured out how to do that.
Okay.
So that might be a good time to look at unofficial SF and see if anyone there has built some sort of lightning component that might help you accomplish that.
Thank you.
But out of the box, I don't think it's there.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, we can stretch a couple minutes more for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go through this one kind of quick, but I wanted to go through one for a loop to kind of explain what we're doing with a loop and how that looks in actual flows. So now our scenario is going to be that we want all of the addresses for our contacts to update anytime we update the address on the account. So for today, I've got 2 contacts on Salesforce. I've got Jake and Siddhartha here. So Salesforce's account address, and we're going to just focus on our billing address today, is right now 701 Mission Street. Well, they are planning on moving to the landmark. So I'm going to update their billing address, and I want all of my contacts to also have that same address. So I want this to happen automatically when I update my account. So I am going to use a record triggered flow. So this is going to be triggered anytime my account object changes. Okay, so configuring the start. Now What object is supposed to do this? Account. So are there entry conditions? Or do I want this to run every time any account is updated? Well, that's kind of silly. I don't. So instead, I'm going to say I want all of my conditions to be met, because for today, we're going to go very quickly. So I'm just going to say if the billing street changes, then I want you to update things. Okay. So I can do billing street. How do I do this? I want it when a record is updated. There we go. So when a record is updated, not when it's created, because you don't have contacts when it's created. So I had to set my trigger up here. So now I can say if the billing street value is changed equals true. So it's a question. Did the billing street change? Yes, it did. Okay, I want you to run this flow. So because I use the is changed, I don't get to pick when the change occurs. It's just literally every time this field changes. So then I can optimize my flow, and I'm going to optimize this to update related records. And so basically what this means is it's going to save my account, and then it's going to run my flow and update my contacts afterwards instead of doing it before. So we're going to go ahead and hit done there. So immediately what I want to do, I have my account. I need to go find all of my contacts. So I'm going to drag a get records onto the screen here. And I'm going to say get contacts. So I want to get all of my contact records. Now, I don't want to get every single contact in my org. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that the account ID on my contact is equal to the account ID of whatever record just changed. So that's where that placeholder record for $ record comes in, which you can see it's tied to an account here. So I can go find the ID field. And I only want to get contacts where the contact's account ID is equal to my record that just changed ID. So I want to get all of the records, and I want Salesforce just to store all of the fields that are on that record and figure out what I need to use when the time comes. So there's no reason to do it the other ways at this point. Save yourself some headache. Okay, so now that I've gotten my records, I know I have 2 because we looked at that. So now I need to loop through them. So if we go back to our analogy of the filing cabinet, we went to the filing cabinet, we came back, we have 2 records. So now we're going to go through them one by one. So I'm going to loop my contacts. And so the collection variable, the stack I'm looking for, are all of the contacts that I got when I used my get contacts action. Okay, so then my direction doesn't matter. Top to bottom works best for me. So I'm just going to leave this here. And then I'm going to start connecting my start to my get to my loop. Now, in my loop, I am then going to move the first one off and into the space in front of me on my desk for me to be able to update things. So now I'm going to update the address. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the current item from my loop. So the file that I put on the desk in front of me is the single record variable that's a current item from my loop, from my collection. And in here, I'm going to go get that street, that mailing street of my contact. And so I want to set that mailing street of my contact equal to whatever the billing street is on my $ record. So if I scroll down here to my $ record again, and I find my billing street, that's what I'm going to set it equal to. Now, if I were to do this in real life, we'd go through all the fields, but for today, we're just going to keep it to this one just for expedience. So now that I have updated that on the form that's in front of me, I need to move it into a stack to my right. So this is going to use a second assignment. So now add to update collection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that current item from my loop, and I want the whole record. So usually it gives you dot notation expecting that you're looking for one single field. I'm looking for the whole record, so I just backspace out that dot. So that current item from my loop, now I'm going to, I did this backwards, hold on. First, I need to set my variable. Sorry, I always get this backwards. So I need to create a new spot on my desk, a new record collection. So I'm going to create a new resource, and it's going to be a variable. So this is going to be a collection variable called contacts to update. So I do it this way because I know very obviously what's going into this is all of the contacts that I want to update. So these are records. I want to allow multiple because I know we have more than one, and they are contacts. So by doing this, it basically builds my container for me with all of that kind of metadata information about contacts into it. So now what I can do is I can add. So I've created a pile, and now to that pile, I am going to add my current item from the loop. Again, backspace out so it takes the whole record, and then hit done. Okay, so now we got that.
So I noticed on your variable, you didn't use input or output. So you just leave it blank then.
Right, because all of this is going to happen within the context of my flow canvas. I don't need to bring anything in from outside because it was triggered by the record, and I don't need to pass anything back out to the database to like a Lightning component or to display on a page. All of this is happening behind the scenes. So it doesn't need to be available for input or output. Okay, so I'm actually going to do this a different way. So when we go through our loop, we're going to go down, we're going to update the address, we're going to add that updated contact to our collection, we're going to go back to our loop, and we're going to do this again. In real life, we're going to do this twice, essentially. So now, after I'm done, it's time to go back to the filing cabinet. So now I'm going to use an update records. I'm going to say update my contacts. Okay, so I am going to use the ID or field values from a record or record collection because I added all of those to that record collection. So that's where my pile sits. So now I'm going to go find that record collection, and that's where it's really great because it's just contacts to update. I know I'm looking for the one that I need to update. Both says updates there. So when I hit done, now I can connect the loop and I say, when I'm done, when I've gone through everything in that pile, take them back to the filing cabinet. Okay, so again, we're going to save this. So this is going to be contact address updates. Okay, so again, I can debug this and run it in real life without actually activating it to make sure it does what I want. Now this is going to run flow in rollback mode, and I can't turn that off here. So, but what I can do is I can say the account that I want to look for is actually the Salesforce account. So I'm going to then update the record. And so what I said is if their street address changes, so we're going to make that one landmark center. Now, because this is in rollback mode, it's not actually going to show in the wild in my records. I would have to activate it and then run it to do that. Actually, you know what? That might be more fun. Let's do that. So we're going to activate this. It's record triggered. So I'm going to come over here and grab my Salesforce account. So I'm going to change this to be the landmark at one market. Okay, so I'm going to hit save here. Before I do that, I should probably prove to you that my contacts don't already have that as their address. So let's do that real quick. Let's duplicate this tab. Okay, so we'll pull up Jake as a contact, and he'll be our guinea pig here. All right, so Jake has 701 Mission Street as his mailing address. So when I hit save here, it should update to the landmark at one market. So we're going to go ahead and hit save. Come back to Jake, do a quick refresh. And now his mailing address has changed. And I never touched Jake as a contact. So it automatically happened when I updated my account. Okay, so I think that's all the time I've got for today. So I definitely appreciate y'all hanging in here with me. I've seen a couple LinkedIn connections come through, so I will happily accept those, but I will turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. And yeah, this is really interesting. And also I was, before this call, I was just talking with Fred about like the flow, the naming convention, like your way to naming it's really smart. It gave me some idea, like how to apply this one. Or yeah, those are like very, very good, like differentiation, like on the variable, all different type of stuff, like to naming there. that's great. Also, like the way, like, you know, you mentioned like the pink item, right? Like in the loop. That's something I never thought about. Like, yeah, it's really good. If anyone has any questions still, okay.
I was thinking, people are starting to shift over to flows, but they're usually not going to refactor all their automations. Do you have any recommendations for where to get started?
So from what I've heard, they're going to take away your ability to build new processes and new workflow rules. So anything going forward, just start building it in Flow instead. If you're starting to build flows on objects that have other automation on them already, then it's a really good time to look at your automation on that object as a whole and try and move it all into one automation tool. So that way you can, doesn't necessarily all have to be in the same flow, kind of like with processes, they say one process per object. That's not necessarily the recommendation, but at least get everything that's happening into a flow instead of having a few workflow rule and flow or workflow rule processes and flows. And really take it as an opportunity, kind of like when you're moving to Lightning. You could take what was in Classic and put it in Lightning, and maybe that was fine, and maybe it wasn't. You really sort of needed to reevaluate things. Reevaluate your entire automation landscape for that object as you're doing it. Are you still using this? Is it necessary? Is there something that has been released since you built that automation that doesn't necessarily need it? Can you do it a different way, a faster way, a better way? Those kinds of things. But this is a long-term kind of conversion strategy. This is not something where it's like drop everything you're doing and spend the next 3 months just changing all of your automations over to Flow. But just start taking some of the easier things, especially like if you want to learn, if you have a process that currently works, take it and figure out how to recreate that process using Flow. And that will also help you because you understand how processes work, you understand what it's actually doing, so you can make sure that your flow ends up doing the exact same thing.
That's great advice. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Another quick question for me is like, on over the, like, how do you documenting this? Like over time, like there will be a lot of flow. Like it's like, even a simple one, like we are managing all the permission set. Sometimes we just lost count tracking, like what this permission set does. Like how do you managing like all the flows, like understanding each one of them, like have a good grasp of that.
That really depends on what kind of tools you have available to you, but I mean, at the most basic level, have like a most basic level, take a PowerPoint or something and build out your flow with boxes and lines in a PowerPoint, and then add notes where appropriate. Lucidchart is also really good for that. You could also do something like that and attach the image, the Lucidchart or the PowerPoint to that and do it in Salesforce even and document it in Salesforce with kind of all of those things if you're using Salesforce for documentation. So I think mostly the important thing is can someone look at one place and figure out what this flow does and all of the pieces that impact it? And if you can do that, you're good.
Hi, Michelle. Is there anything you should keep in mind if you decide to run that record triggered flow asynchronously rather than running immediately?
That asynchronously is notoriously fickle. Asynchronously means it's going to run when it's got time. So if you say, I want to delay this by a minute, it's going to delay it for at least a minute, but maybe 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes, depends on how much other stuff your org has running behind the scenes, taking up those resources before it can actually get its place in line up to the front and run through. So if you're banking on something like that to fire a minute from now every time, that may bite you a little bit.
Yeah.
So, but it's a great way to offload things to make sure that you can kind of
curling next Saturday.
Put them in a separate transaction, or you can make sure that one thing completes before the next thing kind of picks up and runs.
Yeah, so the reason why I'm asking is I'm a developer. I know very little about Flow. By the way, congrats on the presentation. It's very enlightening. So by also running things asynchronously, you increase all the governor limits, right? Which means that instead of those 100 DML executions, you would have 150. So if you don't need the records immediately, like at least from an Apex standpoint, for sure, go async. But that's not kind of true for flows.
I think you absolutely can, and I think that's a lot of what that's really there for. Partially, it's the scheduled path where we wanted something to happen later, kind of like you can schedule things in Process Builder. But I think it's also around those limits and things because they can, be tricky. And so if anything that you can offload to the async process, obviously new transactions, different limits, those kinds of things. So, that's one of the things we're coming from the flow side. I need to learn more about the Apex and the asynchronous branch of things. And what all it can actually help with. So yeah, I think this is an interesting marriage between the declarative admins and the Apex developers, and we're kind of meeting in the middle with flow, and it's like when the river hits the ocean, and you get a little bit of salt water and a little bit of fresh water all mixed in.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
I just want to add for everybody as knowledge, Salesforce is going to give us migration tools in next releases. One for workflow supposed to come in spring release, and then it's going to come one based on lesson learned, one is going to come for process builder. If you are not having reason to move things around, wait for those. They will be supported with more training, more streamlined the way what they are recommending to be the best way to migrate from the workflows to the flows and
yep. They are absolutely working on those tools, and I think they are great as long as you've still done your due diligence and saying, should I migrate this? Instead of just hitting the button and migrating literally everything. It's kind of like when you talk about automating. If you automate crap, all you have is faster crap. So take the time to figure out whether you should move it. And then if you should move it, the migration tool absolutely will help you do it a lot easier. So I hadn't heard the dates, so thank you for that, Nash. That's fantastic news.
Nothing wrong to keep things as is, as long as you don't need to revisit them.
Mm-hmm.
One more question for you, Michelle. I was in a session about flows earlier, probably was last week. Anyways, the guy said that he recommends doing one flow per object. So in other words, you basically, let's say you have 5 or 6 process builders or different things going on for one object. He was recommending putting them all into one flow. But I thought I heard you said it doesn't matter. So I was just wanting to get some clarification on that.
My guess is that was probably Andy Engine Utkin.
Yeah, probably.
That was running that session. So yeah, with processes, they basically came out and said you should have one process per object. And I actually said, I think that's crap and you should have 2. But that's got to be a personal decision. The product manager for Flow, Diana Jaffe, on release readiness webinar actually said it is not their recommendation for you to do one flow per object. It's not even their recommendation for you to do one flow per trigger context. So one before create, one after create, one before update, one after update, and one before delete. Like that's not even the recommendation. The recommendation, the way she had described it, and again, here's the thing about recommendations. Recommendations are general. Your mileage may vary. So if that makes sense and is good for you, go for it. Like, let me just throw that out there. If you want to do it that way, okay. I'm not telling you can't. But what they're saying is that you should use your entry criteria to control your flow only running when you actually need that flow to run. Exactly. So instead of having a flow run every time you change an account record, only have your flow run to update contact addresses when your account address changes. Only have a flow run to update your opportunities on related to that account when your account type field changes. Don't run it every time the account changes, type thing. So use that entry criteria to control when it actually really should fire with a purpose.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Fred, I feel like I'm cutting all into your time. I'm so sorry. I'll try and shut up now.
That's okay. A lot of what I'm talking about is related to flows anyway. It's about a creative application of flows. So it works perfectly.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
And thank you so much, Michelle, again. And I know you have to jump off for your holiday. And happy Thanksgiving to you. And thank you very much for your time today. Yeah.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me, and happy Thursday to everyone tomorrow in Canada.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yep.
Yeah, Fred, it's all yours. Yeah.
All right, great. So first thing I want to say is that it is great to have Michelle do an intro like that, because basically what I'm talking about is a creative application that relates to flows. And I wanted to, it's something that I'd run across. And when I ran across it, I was like, wow, I'd never heard of this. When I talk to other people, they're like, wow, I've never heard of that. So let's see, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, you got it. Okay, good. So let me go ahead and go into presentation mode. So first thing is, I'll explain the background a little bit. So I had a sales VP who had an org which had in it a bunch of checkboxes. And what were all those checkboxes? They were like, first you should do this, then you should do this. And each time you do this, then you check the box. And this was ridiculous because why are people just checking off boxes? This is one of the reasons why people often see Salesforce as just a place to record data, as opposed to a place where you get your work done. Right? We want people to see Salesforce as a place where they get their work done, not just like, oh, I've got a meeting coming up with my supervisor. I've got to enter in, I got to update my records, right? You get that a lot. So how can we do that? And what are some features that are built in to help us to do that? So there is a feature called Actions and Recommendations. You can go and set up, you can search for it, it's there. Most people have never heard of it. It is a way of giving users a clearly delineated list of actions that they should take, okay? And what are these actions? Well, these actions can be quick actions, they can be flows, they can be next best actions. Okay, so they can be a variety of different things. So even if you're not that comfortable with flows yet, you can use quick actions to populate them. You can populate them with quick actions. But if you do know flows or learning flows, you can add flows, which makes it more powerful. Okay. So you might say, well, wait a second. I have something already where I prompt users for what they should be doing next. It's called Path, right? Well, Path is great. Path has key fields, which are, for example, if we're talking about an opportunity or a lead, right? Key fields that should be filled in that stage, right? That makes sense. And they also do have a rich text field, which can be used to populate instructions, advice, links, whatever you want to put in there. But the only way you can vary the advice or the fields is through record type, right? Then with different record types, you can have different paths. And you're only modifying this record, only the lead or the opportunity, not doing things with other records. Sometimes what someone needs to do is not just edit that record. So what are our alternatives? I want to show you an example. I'm gonna jump right into a demo because this is gonna be fairly quick to show you what is possible and what we can do. So let's say we have an opportunity and they're just starting in the qualifying stage. We want them to do certain things right off the bat when they create that opportunity. So for example, we want them to fill the next steps. We want to prompt them to do that. Okay, this is a very simple quick action, and all it's doing is asking them to fill in next steps. And maybe if they want to get a reminder, this is something we've built in, a little reminder date that pops up and gives them a reminder. Sometimes they're also updating the close date, so we throw that in so they can update that at the same time, right? So if we tell them, okay, we need to reach out, right? That's what my next step is. I'm not going to add a reminder for that.
Fred, is that close date the close date on the opportunity, or the date of that action?
That's a good point. So that was a close date for the opportunity. And if that's something you can make clearer by adding some text into a formula field if you really wanted to do kind of creative non-flow things in a quick action. So that was an action that I took, and now it shows it. Oh, I've checked it off. You've done that step. Okay. Now, the other thing I wanted to do is to schedule a discovery meeting. Okay, so this is something that's not a quick action. Well, this is a quick action still. This is creating a record, but all it's doing is just creating a single record, the discovery meeting. First meeting, Bedrock. And you can put in whatever you need as far as the descriptions. You can pre-populate this with some guidance for what should be going on in the meeting. It assumes, I've pre-populated some things in this quick action with, for example, my key contact, right, on the contact role. And I've put in, by default, a date, but you can certainly put in whatever date is appropriate, right? And this is actually just creating an event for me on my calendar. If I've Salesforce synced with my calendar, then it's syncing to my calendar, my Outlook calendar. Right? So there I go. I'm going through and I'm updating things as I go. Now, I might want to change stage. Maybe I'm ready for the next stage, right? And I'm going to go, and as I change stages, it's going ahead and adding additional steps, additional actions for me to take, okay? I might want to create a case. In our org, when we need help from a solution architect, we actually create a case for that, okay? So maybe I want to do creating a case, right? In this case, I want to do something a little more sophisticated that I could do in a quick action. So this is a flow. So it is to create a case and ask for typical case things, but I also wanted to allow the uploading of files, right? So this is actually a flow, and it's got a little upload file component. Right. Now might decide I'm not going to do this right now. I'm going to exit this out. If I don't do it, it doesn't check it off. It doesn't actually check it off. I can do also creative things with integrations like LinkedIn search. We have LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And I want to prompt them to search LinkedIn Sales Navigator for that company and go to LinkedIn and actually go to add contacts from LinkedIn, search for contacts with LinkedIn. Right? So all this is a prompt. That's really what this is a prompt. But sometimes that's all you want to do. You want to propose actions to people, right? And those actions can be customized to whatever the situation is. So how do we customize them? This is where flow comes in. So I can create a flow where I look, and it can be launched based on whatever criteria you set, right? By stage change or by certain field values, and tell it, okay, if the decision is that I want to add this action, I'm going to show you what this is. This is a create records of a kind called record action. This is specifically for adding to the actions and recommendations component. And it has specific field values for flows or quick actions that you want to add. So this is the flow that I wanted to add. It already exists, right? So I'm just adding it, adding the API name. I'm telling it this is a flow, and I can set the order of the buttons, right? So I have in the background, I've decided on order that they're going to be in. I can pin it to the top I want, or pin it to the bottom. And the record ID is just, okay, which opportunity is this? This is the opportunity that launched the flow, right? So in this case, I have a get. So it's actually relating to the get that I did. Okay. So now I'm going through this kind of quickly. I knew I wasn't going to go through and really show you step by step on creating this flow, but I wanted to let you know that I did write a couple of blog posts on this. There's a friend of mine who has a blog, S-Force Maximizer, and so I created one on actions and recommendations, and I created one on inserting the right action at the right time. This has all the details for how you would add record actions to your, in this case, opportunity. Okay. So I wanted to just give you, like I said, I knew that we were going to do a session on flow. I said, I've got this really cool feature that I found. I wanted to make sure to share it with you. I want to also let you know that this can be used for any process. I gave you a sales process, but for example, I'm also implementing Service Cloud, and Service Cloud, of course, I've got similar situations where I might have a case, and I want the support person to do certain things in certain situations. So I want to add all the case details, right? And this is a flow. This is a more complex screen flow, right? Okay, I'm just checking, is this the right contact? Do I have another contact I want to add? And this flow asks them to fill in certain things. I'm actually calling up a table of records here that are related to the case for them to look at and decide whether or not this company has coverage. And then I asked them to fill in more details about the case. This is simply updating information about the case. Okay. And then it updates my case accordingly.
Is this table for component from Salesforce Unofficials or something else?
That's right. And like I said, I knew I wasn't going to get into a lot of details, but since I'm showing you some of this, some of these flows are using unofficial SF components. After you've gotten started with flows, you might be working with it for a little while. Unofficial SF is a great website resource. You have to be careful though. The reason we often don't talk about it to newcomers, to newbies to flow, is because it really does take some decent understanding of flows and how they work. These are basically code that you can add. They're packaged, but you can add it to your org to be able to do things in flow that are not built in, that are not built by Salesforce. That's why this is called unofficial, right? So I just wanted to refer to that, but I wanted to let you know that yes, a table component was one of the things that is a really cool component that unofficial SF added. But that's, I knew that Michelle's session was going to be a while. I wanted to give her the time for that intro. It was a great intro. But I just wanted to introduce the idea of actions and recommendations and let you know that there's this kind of creative way of giving your users specific actions to take where they can keep their activity, their daily work in Salesforce. And so they're not just using Salesforce as just a Rolodex, it's just a place to just store data. So any questions?
Yeah, one question from me. I never saw this before, like action recommendation. Can you go back to the setting, like where this is like
yes, so I didn't get a lot of the details, it's true. So in the setup, there's so much in Salesforce that you just don't even realize is there. When I found out about this, I looked for articles, I could not find any. That's why I wrote a couple blog posts, because like no one is writing. And there's this thing called action recommendations. Now, if you look in Salesforce help, because there is some Salesforce help, they'll talk about Service Cloud. And while of course you can use this for Service Cloud, and it's structured very much for Service Cloud, you can use it in any object. It's there in Lightning App Builder for any object. But so it says, okay, what kind of deployment do you want to do? And I'll walk you through what these are. You would say new deployment if you never created one. So for example, for support, let's use the support one. This is for me for cases, right? You decide, okay, I got to give it a name. I have to say, okay, is this just flows and quick actions, or am I using Einstein next best actions recommendations? Honestly, I never got into this, so I don't use these. But certainly, if anyone does use these, that you can add them too. The next thing is, okay, what objects or object is this tied to? I only have this set of actions for cases. Right? really, that's the way I use these, is only one object.
But can you do it for multiple objects?
Yes, you can expose this. Now, of course, if you create it, you still have to put and I can show you that since we have a little bit of time. You can put it on the page or not put it on the page, right? So I added it to case. I added this for case, but I have to put it on the page still. So here it says, okay, these are specific to service, and you'll see this even if the object is opportunity. This is confusing to people who don't use Service Cloud. So these are all the actions that are possible, right? So these are all the quick actions and flows that are available, right? I can add them as defaults for chat, phone, or just whatever my default is. If I just want to have some, and so if you're not using cases and you're not using chat or phone, then you can just have default. You can ignore chat and phone. If you want to have certain actions and flows that are always there, you drag them onto here. Okay, you simply drag and drop them. They have an area for the top of the actions and recommendations component, an area for the middle, essentially, which is unpinned, and the area for the bottom. So I have, for example, for my support, I always have add system records because all of my cases, this is a required thing. And then I always have review for closure as an end one. But all my other ones, I add using flows. I add depending on the situation, using that record action, like create record action. After you add the default actions that you always want to show up on the record, then it says, okay, which actions do you want to be available to the user to manually add? Okay, so I can go through and check off. There are certain actions and flows which I want them to have available to them in the case. And the way these show up, so I go to the case, there's an add button. So when I click on that add button, all the actions and flows that I wanted them to have available to them are there. Okay. So I can add one, even if it's not currently showing up. And I might not want to do this action right now, so I might exit out, and it'll still show up there as a button.
So this right now, this page, it's not the Lightning app builder, right? Like this is like on the live page. Like how is that can be edited?
Yes. So when you're right that there are several steps. I will say that in my blog post, the first blog post talks a little bit about actions and recommendations and how to set it up. All right, so this talks about actions and recommendations and setup, okay? And adding it to as a Lightning component on the page. So when you edit your page, let's say I want to add it to the case, again, no one notices these things. It's there, but there it is. Actions or recommendations. It's a standard component on every page, right? Now you have to do the setup in setup, right? But I can drag this onto my page and it adds the component. Now you do have to tell it which deployment it is. So we created the support flows, for example. That was the deployment I created for cases. You can call it whatever you like. And I've already added it, so you see it showing up twice. I'll delete that. So this is the one that I added, right? You know, all it is extremely simple. It just says this is the deployment for this action and recommendation component.
Okay, can you step back a little on a couple things? So the one thing where you showed the chat and phone, and you said that's service. So what exactly does that mean?
Yes, so if we go back, if you're in Service Cloud, you guys use Service Cloud? So for those who are using Service Cloud, if if it knows this is a chat-based case or a phone-based case, then these are the defaults.
Okay.
But if it's not chat or phone, or if for any case, let's just put it that way, any case, it'll add what's under default.
And my next,
Is that by record type?
This is not record type. No, this is by, actually, you know what, because I have not done this. It's a good question as to what is the actual, I don't think I have the help page on that. You know, I believe this is by email, this is by origin. But actually, that's a good question because I don't think it's record type. I believe it's origin. But yeah, we can check the Salesforce help for that. That should be help.
Yeah, sure.
Going back to the go back to the default, please. So you said add system as the top pin, add system records. So what exactly does that flow do?
So this is a flow so all these things on the left are all your quick actions and flows.
Okay.
Available for that object. So I can drag any flow. This is a flow I should really separate. Because it is confusing. It's like meta. I've created flows and quick actions, right? Let me leave this. Let me go back to my regular page. If you create flows and let's talk about screen flows. Let's talk about screen flows in particular and quick actions. Normally, if you want someone to launch a screen flow or action, where would they go? They would
press a button, right?
Here, right? Or it would be a button somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So that still can be true. You can still have them as a button here. But what if, so that's the default behavior in Salesforce, right? Is you just add them to the page layout, right? But what if I want to dynamically propose to them certain quick actions or flows depending on the situation? That's what I think actions and recommendations is great for.
Okay, so but the question I had for what did that flow do?
Okay, so that flow, add system records, was that's just a flow I made. What is that flow? If I go back to my flows,
it sounds like you've taken small steps and created little flows for each one of them.
Yeah, basically, I've decided there are certain things that they need to do at certain times, and so I make that into a flow. So add system records in particular, my flow is a system. Now, when I say system, this is an internal to us. This is just, it's not Salesforce system records, and that's not. This is our own. Like I work for Systec, Markham Mamage, and in our world, system record has a meaning.
Okay.
So when I say add system records, it's just, let's say instead, more generically, add licenses. Like let's say you're a company that sells licenses, and you want to add licenses to your case. So it's just a flow where I say get system, get the case, get the system records, and then I have a screen.
Okay, it doesn't matter. I just was curious to see what system records. I was thinking it was more Salesforce related.
No, not at all.
Okay.
The list of quick actions and flows here are just whatever flows and quick actions you want.
The user needs to do.
Yeah, you create those.
Okay.
So actions recommendations is just a component that allows you to populate a list of quick actions or flows that dynamically.
This is great. I've often wondered what this action and recommendations were. So this is perfect. Thank you very much.
And you made my day. That's great.
So my quick getaway from this is it's such a great replacement for the path. right? And because currently the case pass guidance, the guidance especially there are so many limitations there. Like one top of my mind is like, you have like the character limit on how much like guidance content you can putting in there, and there is no automation. It's purely just the text base, right? And display information without actions. So now like you can add in actions into the guidance like type of thing as well. So
yes, exactly. And that's why I wanted to share, because I felt like I was so surprised. Like, why don't people know about this? I think this is really cool. Now I have to say that if all you know is how to create quick actions, this is more limiting. You can't. That means that you're really just placing them there by default, because all of the creativity of when you can add them, you're essentially using what I would call like a meta flow, right? A meta flow that adds flows to your actions and recommendations component. And so, so you kind of have to know flow in order to get the most out of this component.
it looks like this is best to use with flow, not a standalone like feature.
Not with quick actions alone. I mean, you can use it with quick actions. It's useful. You would be able to put quick actions there, and you can put them there really just by default. They would just be there always. But flow allows you to make it dynamic.
So Fred, the blog posts, we go to that URL right there, that will take us to those 2 articles.
Yeah, well, there are lots of blog posts, I realized, so I didn't provide a direct link, but it's basically if you search for Salesforce Maximizer and then, or because I don't know if there's a search function in this blog.
Well, could you just send us or add the 2 articles to your presentation, and then we post it, people can go right to it?
Absolutely, that's a simple.
Perfect.
And I'll post it here in the chat, just so people have it for now. But yeah, the first one is really just the basics about it, just setting it up. And the second one is about creating that, what I might call a meta flow, a flow that adds flows to your, or quick actions to your actions and recommendations component.
That's great, Fred. Thank you so much. That was excellent. Both presentations were excellent today.
Great.
Yeah. One more question to you, Fred. Like you quickly mentioned that this is can be combined with dynamic action as well, right?
With next best actions, yes. So it used to be called Einstein next best actions. Now I think they just call it next best actions.
Okay, so that is something like it's like with orders, action are ordered, right?
Yeah, and I like I said, I've not used it. I know that there is an Einstein there's a next best action component itself, which can propose whatever the next best action is, but it only proposes one at a time. And I didn't get into this presentation, get into what next best action is, but I looked at using that also, but it only proposes one. And for my users, I felt like, they need to do a few things, and maybe they'll decide what is best right now. But here's a few things that will make sense.
I just want to add something not related to Claudine. Before you get off, I'd like to ask you a question. So if you don't mind just staying on for a few seconds after everybody wraps up, I just want to ask you a couple of quick questions. Okay, that's all I want to say there right now. You could continue on, Fred. I just noticed Claudine was still on there, so I just want to make sure.
Yes, thank you everyone for hanging out. It's great to share.
Yeah, it's really great to learn all these like tricks, hidden tricks. Like I never heard about this. I never even looked at this before. Like when I first like see this, why? It's a kind of powerful, like yeah. So both of today's presentation are so good, and also like thank you, Fred, for your patience on waiting on the Michelle to finish hers. Like it was dragging a little bit longer, but really appreciate you are putting this together and share with us on this. Like I think a lot of us have a takeaway from today, and it's well worth the time to listen. Yeah. Let me share my screen a little bit, just quickly. Just a second. Okay. So we have a so today, like we have a next user group meeting. We are planning this will be on December 21st. We haven't sent out the registration email yet, but will be soon. Yeah, so thank you for hanging out, and yeah, thank you for the two speakers today. Anyone has any other questions?
Yeah, I do, if you don't mind me stealing part of your meeting.
Yeah.
The user group leaders have been talking about doing in-person meetings again. We will, if we go in person again, we will always continue on with doing online too. So if you don't want to drive to, say, Canada, you can still join online. But I just wanted to get a feeling for the people that are